Assalamu alaikum everyone, my name is Faizan and I will be your teacher for today. Today we're learning about arrays and loops in Java. Now before we dive in, I just want to remind you not to hesitate to ask me or any of our other mentors any questions. So feel free to reach out to any of our mentors. So goals of this lesson. In this lesson, we will learn about what an array is, how to make our own array in Java, what indexing is, and how to use for loops, for each loops, and while loops. So for our key terms today, I want everyone to pull out a piece of paper or write down somewhere in your notebook. I just want everyone to write down these key terms as we will be going over them later in today's lesson. So we got our data structure, array, loop, initialize, iterate, and index. I'll just wait a couple seconds for everyone to write them down.
I think we're ready to move on.
Okay, all right, so let's talk about what an array is. So an array is a data structure where we can store a list of elements. So a data structure is a way to organize our data so we can use it easily and efficiently. These elements can be integers, doubles, or strings. So here are some examples of arrays. So in our first example, the data stored is an integer type. So we have the heights of students in 10th grade. So we count how many elements we have. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So we have 9 elements in this array. They are basically, in this example, the data type uses integers, and we are storing the integers in this array. And in our second example, the data type is strings and it's a list of colors. So for example, we have blue, green, purple, and sorry, let me go back. So just to get your minds thinking, what are some other things that can be stored in an array? Just to keep in mind, when we're storing things in an array, they have to be of the same data type. So if you're going to store something, you can't have an integer stored with a data type, or sorry, an integer stored with a string. So just come up with some examples, like type in the chat, give me one example of what we could store in an array.
I think we have some responses in the chat.
Yep, temperature in a week is a great example. Student's age is a great example.
Bashar, you said car, double, boolean. These are examples of data types we can store. We want to know what are examples of things that we can store. So for example, we have the heights of students in 10th grade, like 161 centimeters, 172 centimeters, and then a list of colors. So what are other examples like that?
Classes in a day works perfectly. They would all be stored as strings, and they would all fit in an array, and they all fit under the same category. Students marks also works, and the name of the days also works. Okay, so it seems like everyone has got the idea of what we can store in an array. So I'm just going to move on to the next slide. Okay, how to declare an array. So below we have 2 examples of array declarations with strings and integers. We can store non-primitive data types like strings and simple types like integers. So, whoops. So here's just the syntax of how we would declare or create our string in Java. So we have our data type, we have the string and the integer, and then the name, basically what we want to name the array, or essentially our category. So let's take Muhammad's example, classes in a day. So we could have string classes equals new string, and then the number of values in the array would be how many classes you would have that day. So let's say you have 5 classes that day, you would have the number 5 inside of these brackets. Does everyone understand the syntax? Okay, so we can move on. So how to define an array or a string array? So defining arrays is simply just assigning elements into array. Like for example, here we have just like in the previous slide, we have the name of our array, but here we are actually storing what is in the array. So we have all of our colors, blue, green, purple, and it is going to be stored like this on the bottom. All right, let's just move on to the next slide. And so essentially we have the same thing when it comes to integers. This is how we're going to define it. We're going to have the name of our array, and this is where we're going to declare all of our values. The one difference is that when we have an array, just like how when we, for example, like define it, the strings will all have quotation marks, and when you store the integers, they will not have quotation marks around them because they're stored as integers. Okay, so finding the length of an array is very easy because thankfully to Java, Java has given us a variable that allows us to find the length of an array. So the length of the array is just how many elements are in the array. So for example, let's just count the amount of elements. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So if we were to have this string in our line of code and we were to enter, so we're assigning int length as a variable to the value of the basically the length of the array numbers. So in this case, int length would be equal to 9 because this is the value, or this is the number of values in the array. So numbers length is essentially just the amount of values in the array. It gives us the length of the array, but the numbers is the name of our array. So let's say you have, let's go to Waleed's example of temperature in a week. So we can have temp.length. That would give us the amount, or that would give us the amount of values we have in the array. So does this make sense to everyone? Okay, let's go on to the next slide. So this is going to be our first exercise for the day. I want everyone to create your own array. So we're going to be using the declarations. And so we basically we want you to make your own array. It should have at least 4 of your favorite foods. And I'm going to go back to the declarations of the arrays just so you can see. So I want everyone to make your own array with 4 of your favorite foods. All right, I want everyone to wrap up what you're doing. We'll get back in 1 minute.
When you are finished, you can just use thumbs up, or if you want to share what you came up with, then put it in the chat. So something that you wrote for your favorite food.
Okay, so it's been a minute. If everyone needs more time, type in the chat so that we can know. Otherwise, we'll move on. But I just want everyone to understand the concept of making an array. If you have not finished, please type in the chat if you need more time.
I think we can move on.
Okay. Okay, so let's talk about indexing in Java. So the index of an element is its location or position on an array. So remember, index is one of your key terms. So on the left side of the screen, we have an example. We have a string example where I would just please everyone ignore this. We're going to be focusing on indexing in arrays. So in indexing, we have the location of the element is going to be listed by numbers. So the first value in an array is going to start at 0. So we're going to count 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, even though there are 6 elements. So the 6th element is going to have the index of 5. So unlike when we count in math, we do 1, 2, 3. We go 0, 1, 2 in coding. So I just want, I'm just going to ask this question on this array. Actually, let me go to the next slide. So this is just the syntax for indexing. So we have our integer right here assigned to the name of the array and then the index in array. Int num is going to output the index in the array, so 5, and then it's going to give us the element in the array, 33. So I'm just going to ask this question in the chat. What is the value of numbers and then inside of the brackets 2? So what is the element when the index is 2?
33.
Yes, 25 is correct. To those, is there anyone that does not understand how to do this? So when we're getting our value of 25, so we're given the index of 2. So we go to the index at below, and then we look up and we see we have 25. So the same thing applies when we're just going through the code. So this time we're given the index of 5. So we look into our array, and then above the index of 5 is 33. So int num is going to be the value, this value is going to be 33. Okay, so now that we have gone over the basics of indexing, let's talk about how to use our indexes to find elements within an array. So here's the syntax for finding the element of an index in Java. So we refer to the array with its name. So we have the name of our array colors. And then within the brackets, we have we input the index that we are looking for. So in this case, I made this code here. I basically wanted to output what my favorite colors were. So I look through here. My favorite colors are blue and red. So if we look through here, the index is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So my indexes are 0 and 4. So I want to assign a string to the value when the index is 0. So we have our array and then we have the index. So color 0 is going to be equal to blue. So if I set my string fav1 to blue or to colors 0, it's going to be equal to blue. So that when I have fav1 down here, when I say my favorite colors are, it's going to print out blue. And the same thing goes for red. So we have colors 4. Colors 4 is going to be equal to red. So fav2 is going to be equal to red. Does this make sense to everyone? This is just the same thing that we did before, except this time we're using strings. Okay. All right, let's move on to the next slide. So changing an element in array. So what if your array has a value that isn't wanted or needed? And is this array permanent? So the value in an array can be changed. However, the number of values in an array cannot. So let's say we have our array here, 2, 9, 23, and 11. So let's say we want to change the index of 1 to, which is equal to 9, to 12. So this is basically our syntax for doing that. So we have the name of our array, the index that we want to change, and then the new value. So what is the new number stored at index position 2? I can everyone type in the chat. So our previous value was 9, and but now we are going to be changing that to with this code. Okay.
We have some answers in the chat.
All right, so 13. Okay, so if we look at the array, so I assume you guys are looking at this. That just ignore this code. We're talking about this right here. So we have our index at 1, and we have our new value. So when we have this code, basically what it's telling us is take the index at 1 in the array named array and change it to 12. So the previous index we had was 9, but now with this code we change it to 12. Does this make sense to everyone?
I think this was a different example. So index position 1 will be 12, but now we're asking what is index position 2? And I think we had some correct answers.
Oh, sorry. That's my apology. Yeah. So yeah, index position 2 from the code is 13. Yeah, sorry, that is correct. All right, let me just move on to the next slide. All right, so this is going to be our classwork exercise. So bring together our knowledge of indexing, arrays, and operations. We're going to be taking this challenge. You're going to create a code that calculates and prints out the sum of all values in an array. So use this setup right here for your code. You are going, remember that you have to get each element using the index, and don't just directly put in the value of each integer. You actually need to find the value of the integer using indexes. Does what I'm asking make sense to everyone?
Please use a thumbs up if you understand. Yes in the chat. How much time are we giving?
Let's give 5 minutes, and if we need more time, we can always use more. Okay, it has been 5 minutes. We're just gonna go over everyone's answers to, or not everyone's answers to this. We're gonna go over the answers to this. So Bashar reached out to me. He's going to be sharing. So Bashar, if you want to share your screen. Thank you, Bashar, and just explain what you did.
Okay. Everything is okay. My screen is shared. Okay.
Yep.
So I started with integer array, and I used this bracket, so we know it's an array. Oh, wait a second. Probably I have. Okay, this is now correct. Integer array and a new int, and I initializing this 9 numbers, and I started with the summation array of 0 plus array of 1 plus array of 2 till I get array of 8. It is 9, so we start with 0 till 8. And I printed the summation, and it worked. It gave me 125. Is it correct?
MashaAllah, Bashar, that is correct. Thank you for sharing.
Anyway,
Anyone have any questions for Bashar?
Does everyone understand what that question was asking? And does everyone have an answer for that? Please give me a thumbs up if you if this exercise was doable.
I think we can move on.
Okay, all right, I'll move on to the next slide. All right, so why do we use loops in Java? So first, let's introduce loops. So loops allow us to save our time writing code. And to put it as simple as possible, a loop is a repetition of a statement controlled by a condition. So what that means is the amount of repeats taken place depends on the value of a condition. So let's look at this example below. So we have so without loops, we have, let's say we want to print the word coding 5 times. So without loops, when we print it, we just repeat the phrase system.out.println coding. To make it more efficient, to make it easier, and to make it more organized, we use loops. So we're just going to put the system.out.println coding into our loop. And what is going to end up happening with this is it's going to print out coding 5 times. All right, so this is just a quick introduction to loops. We're going to have a 10-15 minute break and then we'll continue on with loops afterwards. Let's try and be back by 6:30 or 6:35, if that's good for everyone. All right, so just to review over why we use loops so we can move on. So a loop's just the repetition controlled by a condition. And in this case, our condition is that we'll go more specifically into that, but that's what our loop is. So so for loops is our first example of a loop. And so why do we use for loops? For loops are used when we know how many times we want to run our code. In this example, we want to print the word coding 5 times. So inside of the parentheses, after the fors, so in between these two parentheses is how we set up for our loop. So so if we look at int k equals 0, so we're basically initializing our a integer to set at 0. So initialization is one of your vocab verbs. Initialization is just to set something to a certain value. So the reason we set k to 0 is so that we can also use k in our inequality or condition. So int k equals 0, 0 is less than 5. And if 0 is less than 5, then this code is going to run inside of the loop. And then k++, after, if this statement is true, then this is going to be applied to k. So just to bring it all together, when we're running our code, we start off with k equals 0. K is less than 5. So we're going to run our code. We're going to have it print coding once, and then k++. So k is now 1. Let's run through it again. So now that we have 1, is 1 less than 5? 1 is less than 5. So it's going to run through this code. It's going to print out coding, and then it's going to do k++ again. It's going to keep repeating this until we get to k equals 5. So when k is 5, 5 is not less than 5. So that statement is false. So what's going to happen is we're going to exit the loop. K++ is not going to be applied to k. And after this, if we were to have a statement that said system.out.print k, k would be 5. So essentially, this for loop, that's how the for loop works. It is allowing us to go through for a certain amount of values to be able to print coding, for example. Does that make sense to everyone? I want to see a thumbs up from everyone in the reactions.
If it is possible for the students to turn on their cameras so we know that you understand.
Okay, so we got some thumbs up. We got our thumbs up. Okay, so so we went over this earlier. We went over finding the index of an element, but this time we're gonna try finding the index using the element. So before we jump into this code over here, can anyone tell me the index of 25? Just write it in the chat. Looking at this right here, what is the index of 25? Remember, 25 is the element, and we're looking for the index. Let me open the chat. Yes, that is correct. Thank you for responding in the chat. 2 is correct. So now let me just open up my, let me just go to the next slide. So 2 is the correct answer. Can you guys see my screen? All right, let me open up the right code. All right, so in this code, so can everyone see my screen? Is it visible?
Yep, we can see it.
Okay. All right. So here we have our code. And so let's just break down this code. So we have our array here. We have it initialized. We have it declared. And then here we're using numbers.length. We went over this earlier. The value of int length is going to equal the amount of values in the array. And so here's our for loop we have that we just went over. We have k equals 0, which is our initialization of the integer. And then we have it set to k is less than length. So what's going to happen is the for loop is going to run through. is going to be, is 0 less than the length of the array, and then 1 is less than the length of the array. And at some point, we're going to get to where k is equal to the length of the array. But we have k as the index. So k is equal to the index value. So now we put in k for our index value. We remember we went over indexing numbers k. So that means that int num is going to be equal to the index at in the array. So if we set this to 25, let's just run our code. It's going to print out 2. So 2 is our correct answer. Now, let me ask this question. What happens when there is 2 elements in the array that we're looking for the index of? For example, if we look here, we have 4 at the index 1 and 4 at index 6. What's going to happen? Can I just see some responses in chat? What do you think is going to happen? I just need to see at least one response. Print 2 indexes. All right, now let's try running it. Let's set this to 4 and let's run our code. All right, so now if we look, we are given the indexes of 4 at both locations. So it's gonna print both of the indexes. Does that make sense to everyone? Does everyone understand? Can I see a thumbs up?
I think your mic is off.
Oh, sorry. Okay, so moving on to the next challenge. So we remember doing this challenge from earlier. We calculated the sum of all integers in the array, but this time we're going to make it easier by using loops. So before, when we saw Bashar's example, he had to individually print out each value, but this time you're going to make it you're going to make a code that uses a loop to go through each value in the array and indexing. Does this make sense to everyone? Do you know what you're answering? All right, I see some thumbs up. Okay, we'll check in at 11:50, and if you, or sorry, 6:50, and if you guys need any more time, then we'll give more time if needed. Okay, so we are done with the time for work. So Muhammad is going to share his code for this exercise.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.
I will share my screen. Can you see my screen now?
Yes, we can see it.
So I started with give me 1 second. I'm sorry for what happened now.
No problem.
No, okay. So I started with the array. So I wrote 9 like random numbers, and I, of course, the length. I did the length, so I know though it will stop with the end of the number of the indexes of the array, and I wrote sum equals 0, then the loop for int x equals 0, and x more than the length, and x plus plus, which means adds 1, and I opened a curly, and sum equals sum plus array x, and I wrote in the end system out println sum.
MashaAllah, that is great. Thank you for sharing.
Thank
So
And then
does everyone else understand what Muhammad did? Can I see some thumbs up? Okay, I'm just going to move on to the next slide. All right, so while loops. So while loops are used when we don't know how many times we want to repeat. So it's used when the amount of repetitions is unknown. Let's say, for example, you want to increase the temperature of, so in this example, let's say we want to increase the temperature in a house when we want to heat it, and we don't know the initial temperature, but we know the temperature we want to heat it to. So what we can say is while the temperature is less than the temperature we want to set it to, it will increase. So that's just an example of how you can use a while loop. So in a while loop, a Boolean condition is in charge of the loop. So essentially, you're going to have a true or false statement. So for example, in the while I is less than 9, it's if it's true, then it's going to run the code. If it's false, it's going to exit out of the loop. So it's kind of that true or false statement that like that Boolean that it's looking for that in while loop. So let me just open up Eclipse to show this example. So let me know if can you guys see this?
Yes, we can see it, but could you zoom in?
Yes. Is there a way to do that? I don't know how to do that.
You press Control Shift A and then type zoom. And then go down to like zoom in.
Okay. All right.
You have to do it like many times.
I think it's Control Plus. Is that not working?
No, it's not.
Can you even try using your 2 fingers to like zoom in? Does that work?
No, it doesn't. Well, yeah. I have a mouse, anyways. It doesn't work.
Go do the Control Shift A and then type signs, something like that.
Okay. So in Control plus numpad plus. Okay. All right. So it's this one. Is it going in? No, it's not.
But
Is it like
in chat? It's you go to Preferences, Editor, Colors and Font, and then Color.
Editor? Okay, and then font.
Yep.
Okay, let's just increase this to 20.
Thank you, Bashar.
Yeah, thank you, Bashar. Okay, all right. So now that we have, so if everyone can see this, so this is just an example of how you can use a while loop to apply basically. So this is just an application of a while loop. So if we just run this code, what's going to happen is it's going to ask us the temperature. Let's say the temperature is 15. And what do we want to set it to? We want to set it to 19 degrees. It's going to use while loops so it's going to act as a heater, and it's going to use while loops here. So we have our 2 values. We have scanner, which is our first input, 15, and scanner 2, which is our second input, 19. And basically what the while loop is running is that while the first input, 15, is less than the second input, 19, it's going to keep running this code, and it's going to increase the first value by 2. So it's going to increase 15 by 2. So this is an example of how a while loop is used when the amount of repetitions is unknown, because when you're going into this, there's a user input. So does that make sense to everyone why we use while loops and how it's applied here? Can I see some thumbs up?
So our condition here is in the parentheses in line 11. So it says that scanner, So scanner is the first number that you put, so 15. And the second number is 19. So it's saying while 15 is less than 19. And the while loop will run as long as that is true. But in the while loop, you see in line 15 that the scanner is increased by 2. So this plus equals is just the same as scanner equals scanner plus 2. So then it goes back and now instead of 15, our scanner is 17. So it says while 17 is less than 19. And so it will keep continuing that until, so we get to 19 is not less than 19. So it will exit the while loop, and that is when it will print done. Does that make sense now? No? Yes? Type it in the chat if you're still confused. Does that make sense, Mohammed? Or
Let me just go back to the slide so I can go over it again. All right, so for while loops, essentially just inside of these parentheses, we're going to deal with a statement like an inequality. And what we're looking for is whether it's true or false. So let's say going into this, I didn't initialize I, but let's say I is equal to 0. So is I equal to 0? We're just going to run through this. Is I equal, is 0 less than 9? Yes, it is 9. So it's going to run whatever is in the curly brackets because this statement is true. It's going to keep running this when the statement is true until the statement is false. So eventually we're going to get I is equal to 9. So 9 is not less than 9. So it's going to exit out of this code. Does that make sense to everyone? It's going to keep running that true or false statement until that statement is false.
so in for loops, we do it for a specific number of times. So in a for loop, for example, we went and we printed coding 5 times. In a while loop, it will run based on a condition. So I is less than 9. As long as that is true, we will do whatever is between the curly braces. And when it is false, we will exit the loop.
Does everyone else get it? Give me a thumbs up in the reactions. Okay, and one more thing to add about while loops is that unlike in for loops where let's go back to for loops for a second. We have, or let's just use this as an example. In our for loops, we have the k++ within the actual parentheses in the actual initialization of the loop. But with while loops, we have to put the I++ in the loop. So it's going to be in the actual code. But essentially, you're getting the same thing where it's just going to be running through values. The only difference is that you're dealing with unknown amount of values. So you're kind of looking for, you're going to get amount of repetitions that you don't. So while loops deal with if you don't know the amount of repetitions, unlike when in for loops, you actually set it to do a certain number of repetitions. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay, let's move on to the next slide. So for each loops. So a for each loop is used when we want to go through each value in an array. So here we have our syntax for each loop. In Java, this is what a for each loop does is it automatically sets I to go through each individual value in the array. So let me just quickly pull up IntelliJ. Can everyone see this well?
Yes.
Okay, so let's just run print. Let's just run it. And so it's going to print each value of I. What basically in this code, I is going to be set to each value in the array. So we have the name of the array and we have the integer. And then when we print I, it's going to have every value in the array. So let's say, for example, we want to add all of them up. We could just do, or let's do before this, like I equal plus equals, sorry, plus equals I. So what's going to happen is it's just going to add all this up, and then we're going to be given, sorry, I messed this up. But so with the, essentially with the for each loops, it's just going to run through each individual index in the array, or sorry, not index, each value in the array. So when we first go through it, I is going to be set to 1, and then it's going to print out that value. And then when we go through it again, it's going to be set to 2. So does that make sense to everyone? It's kind of, for each loops are just used when we want to get values in an array. Does that make sense to everyone? I'm going to go back to the slides just to show everyone the syntax. So we have our data type and the array that the elements are being accessed from. And it's just going to keep going through this array. And each time it goes through the loop is going to be set to the value of the element in the array. So when it first goes through, it's going to be set to the first value in the array. When it goes through again, the second value. When it goes again, the third value. And it's going to continue that until it's gone through every value in the array. Does that make sense? I just want to see a thumbs up or type yes in the chat.
So a for each loop is just a very simple version of a for loop. So this might be a faster way than doing int I equals 0, I less than numbers.length, I plus plus.
Okay, so if everyone gets that, so we're just gonna review when to use each loop. So for loops, it's when we know how many times the code will run. So like, for example, we want to run it for a certain amount of times. With the coding example, we want to print out the word coding 5 times. We know how many times we want to run that code. So in that case, we use for loops. And while loops we use when the amount of repetitions is unknown. So when we don't know how many times we want the code to run. For example, in the temperature or the heating example of code that I gave, where it's going to keep heating the room until it has reached a certain temperature. So in that case, we don't know how many times the repetitions will take place. So we use a while loop. And for each loop is used when we need to go through each element in an array, as we showed in the previous example, and when we do not need to change the value of an element. All right, let me just go. So let's go through all our key terms again. So a data structure is just an organization method of data. It's an efficient way of storing it. So does everyone understand that? And then an array is just the way we store data in Java. It's we basically just we initialize the amount of values in it. And so that's our array in Java. The loop in Java is just a repetition of a condition. Initialize means we're setting something to a starting value. So for example, in our for loop, we set our integer k to 0 so that we can actually use it in our condition. And then iteration is the repetition of a process. So when we're going through loops, that is iteration. It is repeating a certain process. And then when we have, and then our index means that it's the location and position of an element in an array. Do you guys want me to go through that one more time? Does that make sense?
I think you can move on to the next slide.
All right, so here are just the key terms. All right, I think we can move on now. So let's just go over what we learned. So in this lesson, we learned what an array is, how to make your own array in Java, what is indexing, how to use indexing, how to use, like, for example, length of the array, array.length. We use how to use for loops, for each loops, and while loops, and why we use each one of them and their applications. So for homework, your homework is linked on the website, and so just remember to have your homework emailed in by Thursday. Same with extra reading. You can access that from the slides if you're more interested in everything. And then any questions anyone has, please feel free to ask. We finished a bit early, so if you have any questions, if you want me to review over anything, please feel free to ask.
Does everyone know where the homework is? Everyone know where it is? I don't think I see anyone in the document, so I will put that link in the chat. So this is your link to the homework. So this is due by the 18th of February, so next Thursday. So just by, I guess, a quick survey, does anyone want an exercise to practice with while loops? Since we ended a bit early, please let us know if you want to do practice now. Say yes, thumbs up.
Remember, these exercises are to help make sure everything's clear for you. So if you have any questions on while loops, please speak up so we can get the exercise done.
Can you give me the extra exercises, and I will do it with the homework, and I will enter the office hours tomorrow to show you what I did. Like, I won't do it now, but I will show you what I did tomorrow as an extra homework, you can say.
Okay.
Does anyone else want some practice?
Let's put some extra practice with the homework, and if anyone wants to do like Muhammad Kilawi, then they can.
Okay.